wanted to hear dialogue and conversations from you. So feel free to, I'll call on you to ask the questions live. And for those who are on, Matt, feel free to show your video. I'd love to see you also. There you are, Matt, my friend Matthew from Toronto. And I want to share that I may be having somebody zooming in from one of the sea countries, not Canada, but Cambodia, which is like early morning. I had a really interesting informational interview with a student, an engineering student at University of Portland, and she's taking engineering classes, but really interested in transportation infrastructure. And I shared with her about our course. And she said she's zooming in at 3 o'clock in the morning because of the time frame and taking courses. So she might be zooming in as well. So Megan had asked a question regarding homework number 3. I can resend it to you. Yeah, so the homework assignment essentially it's for you to watch the town hall meeting from last week, watch the recording live or the recording, and we have this unique opportunity to have our congressman follow up with us a week later. So we have him for a good hour. So if you want to ask follow-up questions from that town hall, because you didn't get the chance to when it was live, you could do that today. Or you can also ask the questions in general in terms of transportation. So I assigned it as a homework. There was no deliverable or anything, but really just to really tune into today's class. In terms of what other stuff. Okay, perfect. Megan, I can give you the homework assignment for homework number 3. Also, if you've missed it, but what you could do is in the Google Drive, under in one of the folders that I've numbered, there's also homework assignment, and you can look to see. I wanted to also make some space at some point later to ask how things are going with the projects and such. And Rick has always been really instrumental in getting that, fulfilling the project the goals and initiatives, and as it's grown over time. So I know our congressman will be joining us shortly. And I wanted to share with you that for the agenda today, we're going to be talking about transportation justice as well. So my colleague from PBOT, Marisa DeMull, will be joining us for the last hour to talk about transportation justice and equity planning for the city from an engineer's perspective, and also from what initiatives are taking place right now in the course. So yes, the screen is being shared so you can see the agenda. Like I said, this is also on the Google Drive. And I will, actually having Rick on the line is really great. I'd love for Rick to share. I know we're waiting on Earl, but I'd love for you to share your a bit piece of this course, because you've been leading this course for 28 years until I took over last year. And I'm very honored to have Rick and Earl together. Rick is on tonight. He's got surgery tomorrow, apparently at 2. So we're really lucky that the timing has worked out really well. But yeah, I'd love to have Rick have a few words to share with the students.
Sure. Earl was a city commissioner at the time, and wanted to, was convinced that the citizens needed some help in understanding how the transportation system in the city worked. And he wanted to do a class at Portland State. And it wandered around for a few years in the PBOT, in PBOT, and they finally asked me to organize it. And I thought it was a great idea. And we started it, and the city has been a supporter of this, and subsequent commissioners have all supported it. And you can see the class continues. And the part that was amazing to most people, not to me, was the incredible commitment of people to be willing to take this class. And so here we've done this for now over 30 years, Tui, and you picked it up and continue with it, which is just terrific. And I never worked at PBOT. I was always in transportation, really starting in the 70s. And I ran for the state legislature to bring rail back to Portland in 1974. I got elected, was in the legislature with Earl, and then we formed Metro, and I was the first executive elected to run Metro when it was established as an directly elected board. And we moved through the first funding of light rail with it opening in 1986. So it took a long time from that. But the class was part of equipping citizens with better information and a good perspective about how transportation could work and how they could get projects established for their neighborhood. And Earl was very much of a believer in the best transportation planners are the people who live in the neighborhoods and know the streets. And that's proven to be true. And the tradition in Oregon and in Portland particularly is a great deal of involvement by the citizens. But the other part of it is the amount of respect that's shown by the governmental system, city, and other organizations toward the individual citizen who takes the time to really be very much involved. And that's something that's unique to Oregon. And this class is symbolic of that, where now 17 or 1,800 people over the time have actually taken the class. And that many of them have been very successful in getting projects through the city. And as part of this dialogue and meeting with them. And it's just a great thing. And I'm really glad that TUI could keep this class going, because it is enormously useful. And I think you'll find it very useful here. And I'm just pleased that the city is continuing to be willing to sponsor it.
Thank you, Rick. And really, it's a shout out to Michael Espinoza with PBOT, who's our PBOT liaison now. I know we've had Scott Cohen and others and Sarah Goforth, but with Michael taking the lead in being a part of this course and facilitating it and working with me when classes in session, we're like high gear. So hats off to Michael.
Thank you for those kind words. Rick, it's really nice to meet you and have you back here today.
Great to meet you. There was a question about, has any other city picked this up? And yes, actually, Vancouver, BC, British Columbia, at Simon Fraser University does a similar class. Colorado State University had established the class for some time. And Earl as a congressman, travels all over the country. So invariably, I would get calls from the local place because he was pitching this class to them. And I mean, I think it's a great tool to empower the neighborhood leaders, advocates with good information and a good background for how they can effectively convince public leaders to adopt some of their programs. We've had a lot of them through the class, and it's just been really rewarding to see that. But the most important is just the enthusiasm people show in the class for all the different issues that we're facing. And it's so central to our livability. But I've had lots of calls, and I've sent curriculums out all over the country. And that usually tells me where Earl's been traveling.
So, Rick, thank you so much for your introduction. We have our congressman who just joined us, who really is your best friend. I am so lucky, like I said, to be able to facilitate this. It is not very often that you get to see Rick and Earl together. I asked them to come together, and it's, like I said, it's not like they're best friends, so you only see them like on a Sunday brunch. But here we are in our class at the Portland transportation class, and we've got the founder of the course, as well as the one person who led this course through so long. So welcome, Earl. This is our class this year, but we also have two visitors, and I want to share with you my colleague Matthew Davis from Canada, and also a student from the University of Portland in the engineering school, Shahal Suk, who is zooming in a very early morning in Cambodia. She's very interested in infrastructure. So this class has reached far, far beyond Portland. I know you talk about it everywhere you go, but I want to share with you, we've got some amazing students. There's who's very interested in hearing about you, know so much about you, but hearing from you as well. And you really don't need much of an introduction from me. So I will let you have the space to share and talk. Most of them did listen in to the town hall meeting that you held last week. Thank you so much. I get emails from you almost on a daily basis on what you've been doing. I hope everyone also subscribed. But welcome, Congressman Blumenauer, to your class.
Well, I am pleased to be a part of our class. I am excited to share some of this with my friend Rick Gustafson, who took a crazy idea and made it into an institution where we've been able for 30 years to have some pioneering techniques to help empower citizens to deal with the transportation system. It is one of the things I discovered soon after I was elected to the city council and was the public works commissioner responsible for transportation. I found out that everybody was an expert in transportation. Everybody. I found everybody who had a driver's license was a certified traffic engineer. And nobody was neutral about the work we were doing at the city. It was either not enough or it was too much. It was fascinating. I found it exciting that people cared so much about the transportation system, but it struck me that they really were not entirely grounded in basic principles of how that transportation system worked. And so we set up the class. Rick consented to teach it. We worked hard to make sure if people who wanted actually to get it for class credit could get graduate credit at Portland State. And the Alumni Association, I think, is 800, 900 people. I don't know exactly. We had a big reunion a few years ago with several hundred people who would go back from the very beginning of the class.
Right.
But it was one of the more rewarding projects I was involved with. And it wasn't just because having Rick invite in key people in the transportation community from TriMet or the Planning Commission, the private sector, engineering firms. But that was important to help give people a sense of how the transportation system worked. But what we decided from the outset is that we would encourage people who took the class to identify a significant transportation problem in their neighborhood and work to solve it. It was fascinating over the years. I would come at the beginning of the course and kick it off and talk a little bit about it. But then I would come back at the last class and Rick would have several of them present some of the strongest proposals. And it was fascinating. And it was also an educational process for the city transportation mafia, where people had to explain to citizens after the citizens had gotten some basic information. They asked some pretty penetrating questions. And that give and take between people who worked at the city and people who are trying to find out about the process, it was valuable for our team. They learned more about the programs they were involved with when they had to defend it. And over the years, as I listened to some of the best and the strongest proposals, it was clear that the students figured it out. I don't know, Rick, if we ever kept track of how many of the class projects actually found their way into reality. But over the years, the city embraced a number of these projects and funded and built them. I think empowering citizens to work with the transportation system and make it give results that make sense for people is profoundly significant. These are areas that are some of the most complex and controversial. This is, the street people live on. This is the back alley. This affects their business. This affects the safety of their family. So people get involved and invested. I am really impressed with what has happened over the years with the class. In some cases, we've had people take the class several times because there's more that they learn, and they love interacting with the men and women who take the class. Those of you who are taking the class are part of an interesting cross-section of Portland. People who care, people who are invested and engaged, and people who are willing to spend the time and energy to understand how to make things better, speak out, and work on it. I personally think that this is a model that every city should replicate. I also think that it is a mechanism to help make city services more responsive, because all of the city services are complex. All of them are involved with trade-offs. All of them are involved with issues of equity and vision and being able to advance things that will make a difference. I'll stop here in a minute and just turn it over to you if I've left something out, Rick, that you think you want to add. But I look forward to this give and take every year. I look forward to meeting people who take the class. I am excited that every year for the last 30 years, this class is a little different. Every year, the people who take the class and who interact with the government officials and the staff add a little further dimension to this unique opportunity to solve problems. So I will stop at this point. I want to thank you for making the investment that is represented by this class. You have other things that you could do with an evening every week and spending the time and energy on it. And I'm glad you decided not to. I'm glad you decided to make an investment in your city, to get to know your fellow class members who represent diverse opinions and backgrounds and who have their own concerns and challenges. I think this is the essence of what makes Portland different, that we're willing to take these risks. The city itself is willing to support this process, and that we have citizens who care enough to make this sacrifice. And I appreciate the chance to join with you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Rick, is there anything you'd like to add to that as you reflect back on 28 years of running this course? And I'm kind of curious also, is that the vision 28 years ago or 30 years ago was that very, very concrete vision of teaching folks who live in the city of Portland concrete ideas and ways in which you can advocate for your systems. And as we navigate our new world, our new, the world that we're living in now, how do you see that change with so much going on, so much movement with the Black Lives Movement and with equity? And how do you make your streets safer now than ever before? How do you continue to advocate for those systems? I'd love to hear a dialogue between you two as if you were to continue on this path. Am I taking the right path? And how could it be beneficial to everyone?
Well, the interesting part about starting the class was to engage citizens. And really the first year, the city was actually a little nervous about this. And we found that the people who took the class were far more capable than we ever anticipated. And there was more learned by the city than by necessarily the participants in the class. And each year, the class changed and responded to the changes in the city. If you recall, street livability from just the control of an automobile was a very high issue in the 90s. And as things evolved, other issues came in about livability and so forth. And more recently, the issue of equity in our community has risen as a very valuable tool. And that's why the class has changed, to provide an opportunity for people to learn techniques and issues and facts about the role that equity plays in our livability. And it's really focused more on livability than it is necessarily transportation, because we're really talking about people making their neighborhood better. And the class has evolved, and we've had, I swear, all over the 30 years, there's been a change in the curriculum every year, and you've experienced that from your own experience now with having taken the class and then now teaching it. That's been probably the hallmark, is the the flexibility to be able to modify the program to respond to new issues. The 90s were probably dominated by bicycles and neighborhood plans. And now it's much more strongly about equity in the community as it relates to to livability and issues. So that's probably the most significant part I would see out of the class.
I think what Rick said is true. I also think that some of these elements are consistent because there have always been questions from various neighborhood activists about whether they were getting their fair share. They felt that somebody else maybe got a little more money. Somebody else got more attention. This is, there's a tension because you're dealing with what some people feel is a finite resource in terms of money, attention, changing the policies. And it's, in a sense, this is just a continuation of that dynamic. There have been certain elements where people in the neighborhoods resisted some of the citizen-based reforms. They didn't want to be inconvenienced with their neighborhood shortcut. You know, I'm a Portland native, right? And I used to pride myself as the quickest way to get from point A to point B. And I didn't pay any attention to the city's arterial streets classification system. I used underutilized shortcuts that impacted neighborhood livability. And I did that unthinking for several years. Well, now we have a different attitude in terms of using the transportation system, being able to protect neighborhoods, being able to place a premium on safety. And we've talked about safety, but it has been very slow to get the priority in terms of budgets that is now happening because citizens have demanded it and moved forward with the Vision Zero approach. So in a sense, this is a continuation of the age-old challenges to be able to make sure that people feel they're being treated fairly in their own neighborhood. But in part of it, it's being innovative and thoughtful and inclusive and being able to reach out to understand the impacts that one person's solution has on another person's neighborhood. So I'll stop at that point, and I'm looking forward to hearing the comments and questions from the class.
We had some questions prepared, some of them as a result of the town hall meeting, but I'd love to be able to have this opportunity now as a dynamic opportunity so that we can ask live questions from you. So versus doing it on the chat, I'd love for you to raise your hand and do the hand raise function, and I'll call on you and we could facilitate questions where our congressman gets to hear them directly from you versus being translated by me. It can help.
Or comments.
Yeah, I see Carrie has raised her hand. Would you like to ask a question, Carrie?
I would. Thank you, Toy. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, Rick. I hate just to call you Rick, but that's what I'm going to do.
That's fine.
When I was watching the town hall last week, you and AOC did a really great job of explaining how federal housing policy, the changes over the years have really impacted what our neighborhoods look like now and things like that. And one of the things I don't really understand is how does federal transportation policy trickle down and affect like how our neighborhoods look right now and things along those lines. And I was wondering if you would be able to touch on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, that is a very profound question. But if you think about what's happened in our city, federal policy has had a tremendous impact. Federal policy in the 60s and early 70s was pretty heavy-handed. Federal policy regarding transportation dealt with the federal interstate highway program, the National Defense Highway Program, actually, dating from the late 50s through the 60s. It put huge sums of money for freeway construction. There was virtually none available for supporting our transit systems. The projects were constructed with very little sensitivity to the impact on the neighborhood. Recently, we've had a number of people with the albino vision who were concerned about what happened with federal policy in terms of transportation and urban renewal. That was just kind of dropped down in our city, and it was put on land that was deemed to be worthy of redevelopment, that it wasn't high value. It was inexpensive to take the land and build projects. And that had a tremendous impact on our Black community. In East Portland, the 205 freeway went right through the heart of a vibrant neighborhood and moved out some 18,000 people. And really, I think most people would say to the detriment of that mid-county area that posed real problems in terms of its having the integrity and the neighborhood strength and the protection of its schools. The I-5 freeway built cul-de-sac 5 miles of neighborhood streets through the heart of North Portland. That didn't enhance the quality of life. It certainly made it easier for people in Vancouver to get into Portland, or people in Portland to leave to go to Vancouver, but it was not done with a lot of sensitivity about the impact of Portland neighborhoods, of Portlanders. So the federal policy spent a lot of money to help people leave the city, spent a lot of money to improve road, highway-only projects. It wasn't balanced, and it had a heavy price on lower income neighborhoods and often people of color. So the federal government had really reshaped the urban landscape across the country. And you're still seeing parts of the country where big ring roads had been constructed. In Detroit, Rick spent a lot of time working General Motors, where the federal highway investment in Detroit really destroyed the viability of neighborhoods. It added economic activity in the surrounding suburbs, but added to the division, added to the racial divisions. And so federal policy for the first 20 years was really pretty heavy-handed, was not thoughtful, and was oriented towards the automobile and suburbs, and very little attention given to the citizens, especially lower income citizens and people of color.
And that Earl's absolutely right, and it's changed considerably to where there's the federal policy now provides a lot more responsiveness to the direction of the metropolitan areas, so that the funding that's provided, you have the ability to move that funding to different categories projects. And that has been enormously valuable to this region. And we actually, I mean, historically, we created that with the Mount Hood Freeway. And that all the changes in the laws that responded to a local initiative for how the federal funds could best be spent in shaping our urban area was translated into major legislation in the 90s that changed the transportation direction in the federal government. Pretty amazing to watch.
That's an interesting case study for any in the class. Looking back, the so-called Mount Hood Freeway actually was the Chuck E. Cheese Freeway. It was only going to go to 92nd and Powell. And it got ahead of the neighborhood planning process. It would have left 5,000 people who had been displaced. It was going to move out 200 businesses. It would have as much traffic congestion the day that it opened as it was theoretically going to solve. And it would, I'll tell you, if that freeway had been constructed, you wouldn't have had the revitalization in Southeast Portland, on Hawthorne, on Division, the inner city neighborhoods that are so vibrant now. They would have been hollowed out. And citizens drove that. And we were able to, in this fact, trade in $800 million for this massive freeway through the heart of Southeast Portland. And instead, we were able to use it to get a head start on light rail, on being able to construct road projects all over the region, and in ways that the region was able to have control. And as Rick says, it helped usher in a change in federal policy that has made a difference from coast to coast.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a follow-up? Or is there a big queue of questions?
We do have a big queue of questions. Let me take let me take the next one.
Yeah.
Byron?
Hi. This is Byron Palmer. To me, one of the biggest issues that we have currently facing our country and the world is climate change. And we have a national policy of total disregard for climate change coming from the president and the Senate. Here in Portland, I thought we were doing well with the bicycle plan, but it has basically stagnated. What do you see as a way that we are going to try to address climate change, at least the transportation part of climate change?
Earl's muted.
You're mute, Earl.
Okay. And take a look at the transportation bill, HR 2, that the House just passed under the leadership of our friend and my colleague, Peter DeFazio, which placed a premium on alternative transportation models, placed a premium on construction techniques that were low carbon. There are things we can do just like with concrete that will make a big difference. Being balanced in terms of the investment in transit, freight movement, and requiring that there's a multi-dimensional approach in planning these things. I am quite confident that if there is a Biden administration, that you're going to see major investment that will be consistent with a low carbon future. There's $2 trillion that the Biden people are looking at to be able to realize that vision. And there are interesting and exciting things that they're talking about. I think there'd be a very good chance that a Biden administration, as part of a rapid economic recovery, because we're going to be battling the ripple effects of the COVID crisis for at least 2 years, if not longer. I wouldn't be surprised to see a proposal from the Biden administration that one of the things they're going to do to try and jumpstart the economy and help local communities is pick up the tab for transit for a year, allow transit to be free across the country, to be able to get people involved again, feeling comfortable with transit, and being able to help local communities because the ridership is down. Many of them have revenue sources that have been decimated. And it would be kind of an interesting opportunity to test a theory that a number of people care about in Portland is, what if we made it free or almost free? We do that with students. Let's extend it. And I think these are things that you're likely to see that would make a big difference as we're trying to recover the economy and strengthen communities that have been really pounded.
Thank you for that answer, Earl. We had former Mayor Sam Adams on 2 weeks ago, and this is exactly what he talked about, was making transit free for students and the Fairless Square. So I'd love to have that, bring that back so that everybody has, it's equitable for everybody across the board. The next question, the next person who has his hand raised is Quincy. Quincy, can you ask your question, please?
Yeah. Hello, Congressman and Rick. Thank you so much. My question relates to historical redress and looking at kind of infrastructure development within communities of color. I know we talk about the albino vision and other spaces. There's a lot of transit-oriented development issues. What is the city, country, and kind of other states looking at how to actually promote infrastructure that's equitable when developing these spaces?
This is a critical question because too often we have seen that communities of color, starting right here in Portland, have paid the price for so-called progress. They've had to be moved out so that others could get to the suburbs faster. There has not been a sensitive design of the projects. I think we are seeing here now in the city, and I'm working to make this part of federal policy going forward, that you're actually going to work with the community. You're actually going to consider the economic and social impacts. You're not going to have a narrow definition of what the environmental impact is. There needs to be an environmental and social impact. And it ought to be something that empowers and strengthens the local community, both in terms of the design and placement of transportation facilities, but also who's involved. There's a lot of money involved with big transportation projects. It ought to be easier to hire people from the community at family wage jobs to be able to be a part of it. And I know that that is part of what is being discussed with the team Biden, but it's something that we want to do here in terms of making sure not only that it's designed with the community involved, but there are ways that the community benefits from the investment, from the changes. It is estimated that the entire interstate freeway system could have been built if the government had just kept the land around the interchanges and then auctioned it off. And the great increase in value from the freeway development would have generated so much money that it probably would have paid for the entire project. But the people who benefited from those investments tended to be people who were well connected, people who already had property. I mean, it isn't an accident that the 205 freeway intersects with I-84 at an area that had been owned by the Fred Meyer Corporation and by old Mr. Fred Meyer himself. And one of his best friends was on the Transportation Commission. And that property appreciated in value dramatically. Ironically, they didn't even want to work with us when we were putting light rail in there. Fred Meyer Corporation built a new store at the light rail station at Gateway. And they located it as far away from the light rail station as they could. I mean, it's crazy. So these are things that we want to be able to work with the community, have better policies in place, and make sure that people are heard about both what they want and also how it is developed in a way that provides the benefit to local property owners and local people who can work on these projects.
There's such an opportunity with the I-5 Rose Corridor, or even the Interstate Bridge project that's taking place right now. There's such an opportunity.
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment because I went to school in California, and something that I noticed was so different was that I worked with so many planners who came from the community, who like maybe didn't go to college, maybe didn't go to planning school. But when I come back to Portland, I'm also from here as well, and I don't see that same grain. I see that there's a lot of people that have had to go through the motions and the hoops to be able to plan here, but a lot of the neighbors that I grew up with don't have that same opportunity. So.
Thanks for the question, Quincy. You'll hear more from Quincy soon. Mariah Schreiner?
Schreiner, yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Congressman and Rick, for being here tonight. My question is more about federal investment. Is there specific legislation that supports federal investment in things like biking, safety improvements, and sidewalks? So if the transportation outside of vehicles, and if so, what equity lens does it include?
There are investments in alternative transportation, as it's called. I've introduced legislation actually that would expand things like bike share and be able to make it accessible more broadly. There's just in a few business districts and upper income neighborhoods. Working hard to have the Vision Zero baked in to local policies, to be able to have the resources to do this right, to have a higher value on safety. You know, it is maddening that there has been so little that has been invested in our bike and pedestrian program, even though this is where there is a disproportionate number of injuries and deaths, but they haven't invested in trying to put the resources on the ground that would make those facilities more safe. We've had over the years pretty strong opportunities to invest in alternative transportation. Unfortunately, the Republicans and this administration in particular has stripped them away. It's maddening to me that, for example, the Tiger grants that we developed with President Obama and Vice President Biden to be able to have these special programs that were leveraging multimodal opportunities, having them part of larger plans to solve multiple problems. And instead, this administration is using that highly flexible program that's designed to engage people in comprehensive, thoughtful, multimodal solutions. They're using that money to build bridges in rural America. I mean, it's shameful and embarrassing, and it's a real missed opportunity. I think we're going to get them back. If you look at the legislation that Chairman DeFazio development. It's got a number of these things that we've been working on. He embedded that in that legislation. And that's going to be probably the blueprint for the Biden administration and their infrastructure program going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I'd love to. First of all, thank you, Congressman and Rick, for joining us tonight. Really appreciate both of you taking the time. My question for you, Congressman, is about commuter benefits. When I moved to Portland, commuter benefits were fantastic. I was a bike commuter, and just getting those little $20 checks to be able to spend on bicycle commuting were really great. And then around 2017, it sort of disappeared. And I was wondering, I'm sure there's some reason why that happened. I don't know what it would have been. But let's assume that things turn out really well in a couple of weeks, and there's maybe a new president and maybe a few more Democratic senators. What do you have in mind in terms of incentivizing bicycling and transit use? And what's sort of your dream package around that?
Well, we've actually drafted that legislation. It's no coincidence that when the Republicans had a chance to write their comprehensive tax, I hesitate to use the word reform, $2 trillion giveaway to the wealthiest of Americans, that they cut out the Bicycle Commuter Act. I got that enacted in 2008, 2009. And then the Republicans took over and they refused to allow moving it forward. We have a number of proposals. One that I think would make a big difference is to equalize the commuter benefits regardless of what mode of transportation people have. Give them the same financial benefit if for parking, for transit, for bicycles. Let the commuter allocate, I don't know, $150 a month in a way that makes sense for them. We all have different circumstances. For some people, it would make more sense to invest in their bicycle commuting. Another person to get a flexible transit pass because once a week they've got soccer practice and they're taking kids. Giving that flexibility to the individual taxpayer makes a lot of sense. And it doesn't have to be something that increases the budget deficit. I would propose that we just have a uniform transit benefit, say $225 a month for any commuter, and that we would set that level by reducing part of the parking benefit, which would make a lot of money so you could enrich the other elements of it. And everybody would be treated exactly the same, no matter where they live or how they decided to get to work.
Thank you. That's really great to hear.
Rick, do you have any follow-on comments to that?
Yeah, that brought back memories because there's been so much progress made in supporting alternative transportation, particularly bicycles. And there's a great attitude in Portland about it, but obviously the federal side still tends to be, well, Earl had made great progress in the 2000s. We actually worked with them closely to change the criteria for how transit projects are supported, because the speed of the transit project was the highest priority, and that got changed over 8 years from 2001 to 2009 to where projects that served inner cities got a higher priority. And all that progress has been suspended for a period of time for the last 4 years, and hopefully it will change.
it was quite perverse that projects got the highest rating that drove people the furthest from the city center. Rick had a concept about giving value for a trip not taken. That what we did, for example, with the streetcar project and some of our other innovative transportation items actually reduced congestion because people didn't have to get in a car and drive. And so giving value for a trip not taken actually made economic sense. And it certainly helped with our vision of what transportation should look like.
Very true. Very true. I see, Josh, would you like to ask your question next?
Sure. So I think we tend to see a planning and a funding model that tends to favor large capital projects because that's part of what's incentivized by matching federal funds. So they kind of tend to take some of the oxygen out of the room, even though we see a lot of times we need money for maintenance or operations or incremental improvements. Like, what do you think we can change to the funding model so that it doesn't kind of bias it in the one direction?
Well, part of it is having federal support for operations. Not exclusively capital. And this is something that would make a big difference now in terms of watching the funding model for transportation across the country collapse. They're losing ridership and their costs are going up dramatically. Providing some support for transit operations would make a big difference in terms of them being able to bridge these gaps. At some point, we're going to be more sensitive about the overall approach to urban development. Having more of these funds distributed on a matching basis, not just massive capital programs, and change the definition of the capital program that is eligible. No capital program should get massive federal funding if it doesn't reduce the carbon footprint, if it doesn't promote opportunities for urban development that is equitable and fair. Changing those formulas will help provide the right price signals so that we're getting the most out of the federal dollars. The formulas in the past have been too narrow. They haven't been focused on livability, on strengthening community and giving people choices. We've made some progress. We had the ICE-T legislation, the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991, but we are in retreat since then, and it's been chipped away by successive Congresses. And I hope we can go back to some of those fundamental principles, giving flexibility and putting investment in things that have multiple benefits, and putting at the top of that list dealing with carbon reduction and sustainability.
A lot of progress has been made since ICE-T, although threatened more recently, but the ability to, you even have within the federal funding categories, the ability to shift funds to support portions of their operation. And so that these flex funds, both from the state and allocated to the region by the federal government, give you what I think is the most important component, which is being responsive to the local preferences. So our metropolitan area has developed a much longer history of supporting alternatives, and they've benefited people in this city can see the benefits of the alternative transportation. Walking and biking are the best thing for the carbon emissions, best transportation mode. That ought to be the preferred mode in a city rather than the large freeways and systems. But essentially that giving the flexibility locally with a good plan has been done, and I believe it will continue and become even more prevalent.
I think that's very important when you talk about livability and health. Earl, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that town hall that you did. Let me stay away from some of the questions, but I know that town hall was amazing. Thank you so much for having it. I also recognize it was huge on environmental justice as well as housing. And we have a group who's very interested in housing, as well as land use and transportation. I'd love for you to do kind of a synopsis debrief from what you gathered from that town hall, and share with us if that's okay.
I think enough attention is not given to housing. When we're talking about the quest for racial justice, the federal government for a century has discriminated against people of color, especially Black Americans, and denying them equal access to housing programs, and actively discriminated against them in terms of redlining, where there were certain neighborhoods that they weren't eligible to move into. Black veterans, when they returned from World War II, couldn't just buy a home in Laurelhurst. The real estate industry, the banks, and the federal government actively work to restrict those choices. Housing really is probably the single most important determination for academic performance. Where a child lives is a much more powerful indicator of his or her academic success than the student-teacher ratio or how much we spend per student. Housing is critical for healthcare. We have people who are struggling, for example, with addiction in this community. And if they move out of a recovery program where they're stabilized, and if they don't have stable housing, they're much more likely to relapse and end up costing themselves and the community far more than it would have cost to be able to provide some subsidization for the housing. In terms of justice, I mean, let's go through the list in terms of wealth accumulation. Denying people the right to buy homes and participate in that market, or if they did, giving them much inferior terms. Subprime loans were routinely given to African Americans when they sought to buy a home, when they would have qualified for a conventional loan, which would have saved them hundreds of dollars every single month. So getting this housing equation right is very, very important. It's key for wealth accumulation. It's key for education. It's key for being able to have the health that people require. I am excited about progress that we're making, raising the awareness that the federal government needs to get back in the housing game. The federal government needs to share the subsidies. We subsidize $32 billion a year for home ownership, but most of that goes to upper income people for their income tax deduction, for their mortgage. We could turn that into a credit that would help everybody the same and promote more equity. I have on my website a housing report that I spent most of last summer and into the fall working on, and I would invite you to look at it because we detail the problems with discrimination. We detail specific things that would make a difference in trying to reverse it. I think that it's kind of the hidden agenda that needs to be in front of every policymaker.
I just put your website on the chat room, so everyone can also put a link to it.
Yeah, Earl's comments on housing were terrific.
Yeah. I know I have one more question, but we're like right on the dot at 7:49. So can I ask one more question? Yes. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute
I'll
again.
give a shorter answer unless it's.
We'll give a shorter answer. Julie, you're on.
Okay, I'll try to be fast. Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you, Rick. I'm wondering what sort of, I know a lot of this doesn't happen at the federal level, but I'm wondering what sort of incentives, financial or zoning or otherwise, are available to encourage affordable, dense housing close to high transit corridors. I'm just thinking so much about the Yellow Line Max and how, not that it's necessarily happened in the best way, but how it seems to have taken 16 years for development to really start happening from opening to now. And also thinking about new high transit happening that also has massive park and rides, which seems like that land and money could be better used to build affordable housing for folks.
Absolutely. In fact, I think it's time to reconsider what we do with the parking situation. One of the issues is that we don't price the curb. Parking, there is this expectation that people are going to be able to park virtually wherever they want, and it won't cost them anything, except it does cost. I mean, the acres and acres of parking that surrounds development is reflected in the rental costs of the businesses that operate there. Free parking is not free. Being able to transform some of these park and ride lots into housing immediately adjacent to the transit station is a way to reduce trips. We have, it's been estimated, what, 8 parking spaces for every car in the region. We don't need as much parking as we have. Being able to have a reasonable system to price parking. I mean, the worst day of the year to park in downtown Portland is one of the 8 holidays where the parking meters are free. And so people get in there and they park and they stay all day, and you have other people circling the block trying to find a parking space. Having parking that is priced is a way to be able to maximize that benefit and use that money for other development priorities. Now, that's not easy. Lots of times there's public resistance to it. So you need to work with people like who take this class to be able to explain to fellow citizens the opportunities, the challenges, and the costs. But there is a tremendous opportunity to redevelop acres and acres and acres and acres of asphalt that has been constructed to give people maximum parking that day after Thanksgiving, and it seldom is cost. Promoting transit alternatives, allowing people to walk and bike, reduces that demand and makes us all better off.
I agree. The federal government still fully funds parking structures around transit and will not participate in housing or allow the land that's purchased for the area to be developed into housing. So it's a very, still a policy that we have to work on, because a parking space isn't much bigger than a lot of the units. You could build housing units and get more riders than you do with a parking structure.
One of the proposals I'm advancing would be to take surplus property that is no longer needed for the use that is currently employed by an agency who used federal funds to develop say the parking lot, and allow them to repurpose that, allow them to sell it and use the proceeds for anything that is consistent with the purpose of the original project. As it stands now, they're required to pay back the federal government the full value of the property that might be left over, they might want to repurpose, or pay back what they got or what it's worth now, whichever is the greatest value. And we ought to treat it as a grant and let them use it as they see fit and get a lot more public benefit from it.
I don't know how to do a round of applause on Zoom. Can we just like do a round of applause? Thank you so much, Rick and Earl. Thank you so much. I would love to keep you on if you'd like. You're welcome to stay on. Class ends at 8:40, but next up we have we're gonna go on a break, but we have a poll that I'd like for you to participate in, and it sets us up for our next speaker, which is my colleague from PBOT, Marisa DeMull. She'll be talking on transportation justice. She's an engineer, does planning work, speaks eloquently about transportation justice and how to plan and design for more equitable systems. So I'd love for you to stay on if you like, but let's go onto a break. And Molly, if you could bring up the poll, and we'll prep for Marisa's presentation. And let's do this poll, and let's do a 10-minute break. So let's come back at 8:06, and we'll start right after. Marissa, I don't know how I set you up to follow Earl. That's so unfair of me. I owe you so much.
It's totally fine. I just watched the debate, so I was like, I also have questions, Congressman. If you want to stick around, I have some more questions for you.
Who was debating that night?
It's a presidential debate.
What's the debate?
Mm-hmm. I think your audio is weird. Is that happening to other people or just me?
Same here.
Okay.
I'm hearing that too. Twee, can you give it another test on your audio? It's coming through really muddled. Maybe you want to try exiting the meeting and then rejoining.
I think it sounds really fun. It's just probably not what you wanted. It's a very cool effect.
It was like a haunted house vibe.
Yeah, it's kind of got like a haunted robot feel to it. Yeah.
Yeah, like being underwater.
What's anybody
saying is, Molly, if you could close up the poll and then share your screen, and we'll give the floor over to Marisa.
Thank you. All right, I can see the poll results. Can other people see those? Okay. Maybe we'll give it a second. Well, I want to say hi, first of all. It's 8 p.m. on a Thursday. I just watched the debate, so I'm like a little frazzled. Feeling a lot more anxiety than I was 2 hours ago. But I'm excited to be here, excited to see actually some familiar faces in this class. I didn't know, I did not check the roster beforehand. It might have been worthwhile, but I do see some familiar faces. This wave is for you. Yep, there we go. Hi, Quincy. Thank you all for having me. I hate following Earl. He's got like the most knowledge, especially when it comes to Portland transportation. And so, you know, he just knows everything. He did everything, so he knows everything. He's the perfect person to come to this class. I do some things, I know some things, so I'm gonna talk about that. My name is Marisa Trujillo DeMull. I can't share my screen. I have a PowerPoint. Since we have about 20 minutes, I'm probably just gonna kind of cruise through some things, go through some ideas, and we will see what I can do to help you all move forward with the equity elements on your projects. So,
and Marisa, should I start sharing your presentation?
Yes, please. I never said that.
Okay, I'll just do that.
Oh, hi. Yep.
Hi.
So, all right. Anyways, all right. My name is Marisa Trujillo DeMull. Like I said, I work for PBOT. I'm a senior engineering associate. I used to work at Alta Planning and Design. Quincy was an intern there when I worked there. That's how we know each other. I am currently working in the traffic division of PBOT. I work with Michael Espinosa, a bunch of familiar faces on this actually. And I am here to talk to you about the sort of equity elements of traffic engineering. And I know what you're thinking, are those things related? And I'm telling you, they are. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay. So just to start out with a little bit about myself, I am, here we go. I am from New Mexico. we have one of the highest rates of pedestrian fatality in the nation. Issues of traffic and transportation are near and dear to my heart, but also issues of race. I'm Mexican American. This is my cousin's quinceañera on the right. I'm in the middle. And my cousins don't know I show this picture. They would be real mad. And then the picture on the left is my daughter. And so I know oftentimes we have professionals come and speak to classes about issues that we are well educated about, that we have written papers about or know theory about. And I just want to really emphasize that this is rooted in my life experience. Yes, I'm a practicing engineer. Yes, I work for PBOT, but also I'm a Mexican American woman with a Black daughter. And I live in this world where people of color are not safe on our streets. Next slide. So we're going to go through 3 quick things. Understanding racism. I'm going to be honest, you all did great on that poll, so I'm just going to flip right through those. We'll talk briefly about walking while Black, and then I'm going to kind of wrap it up with some ideas around equity engineering. If you have questions, I'm happy to slow down. Otherwise, I'll just run through the material in hopes that we have time. I'm almost positive there won't be much time at the end though. So if you do have questions, please interrupt me. I'm happy to take them. I don't mind it at all. Or you can put your hand up and Michael or who else? Some other administrators can help me.
Yep, me and Malsri will be on it.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to start with some definitions. We looked at these already. Really just to emphasize that the language that we use around topics of race is very important. I have updated this slide more recently to include some of the PBOT equity information. I know you all have a project at the end where you have to do like a local infrastructure. Michael Mann, I see your face right now, so I'm going to call on you. Have you started working on your project yet?
There, I'm unmuted. Yes, I have.
And is it like a infrastructure design project or is it like a planning project?
It's an infrastructure project.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a tool here that I wanted to show you all. Can you click on that link for me, Malsri? So this tool is something that you all can use for your design projects and also for any planning projects. And it's our equity matrix. So PBOT put together overlapping GIS map to show the most sort of critical areas in the city where we need to really consider elements of equity, not just race, but also income, language. And looks like that link maybe died. And so what would be, I think, really valuable for folks as they're looking at their projects would be to pop this open and see where your project lies. Is it in an area that we consider to be underserved? Is it one of our frontline communities? That's the communities that sort of live and are most impacted by the work that we do. This doesn't bode well at all. This link doesn't work. It's something that we can send out. It's a very easy to access link.
Yeah, I can send it out. I can send it out. It doesn't look like it's working.
Awesome. Thank
No
you.
problem.
Okay. Michael uses this tool all the time. He's very well informed. All the things I'm saying, he lives and breathes it. Like
I just put the link into the chat, so
thank you.
feel free to click on that.
Okay, you can go on to the next slide here. So PBOT uses a lot of different equity tools. So when you're thinking about your projects, we have just a million resources. We have a framework, we have a toolkit, we have a matrix, like really whatever you want to really think about the equity pieces of your project. It's there, it's available. You can DuckDuckGo it or Google it or however you use the internet to search and find those tools. And we can also, Michael, can you answer those chat questions for me? We can also send them out to you as if if you would like that. So some of the other language that we really focus on at PBOT is structural racism, institutional racism versus sort of internalized and interpersonal racism. There's a really big distinction, as I'm sure you're aware, based on, again, your poll responses, between interpersonal racism and institutional and structural racism. And right now, PBOT is working diligently to make amends and or recover from the long legacy of institutional and structural racism in our city. And that looks like creating our history and legacy of racist planning plan that, did somebody come and lecture on this already? I'm not sure, I'm sorry. Twee?
Art just mentioned it. No, this is perfect. This is perfect.
Okay, great.
Art mentioned it as initiatives from PBOT.
So,
but this is good. These are good reminders.
So while we're on sort of like the planning side of that, you know, we're still kind of figuring out like the research part, which is like, so we know there was a wrong, and we know that it continues to exist to this day because of the structural and institutional racism. And we have literal receipts to prove it, right? And so now it's about like taking that information, like how do we plan for the future? And then how do we carry that through into the design and implementation of the work that we do? Okay, so you can flip to the, I think this is the last one. And so we used to talk about an equity lens, and that's what they used to make our 5-year racial equity plan, which is another link we can just probably send to you.
I sent that over already as reading assignment.
Yay. Now we really think about an equity vision. We don't really say lens because there's like a really negative application. They're like, oh, I just can put it on when I want to think about equity and then take it off when I don't want to do it anymore, right? That's a terrible analogy. We really want to think about it as like a clear vision, as an entire world that we're considering and not just this like lens. And then I put in explicit and implicit bias in here because a lot of the work that engineers kind of, especially traffic engineers, think about is kind of delves into the psychology of drivers and pedestrians and bicyclists and actually transit operators. So when we think about bias, we often think about explicit bias, like kind of, you know, openly racist people. But most of what we experience on the roadways is implicit bias, is maybe not something people are even aware that they're doing until it's pointed out to them. Okay, so on to the next piece, which is walking while black. When I was running through this, I realized I chose a biking while white picture for this slide. Sorry about that. That was really bad. That's very, very bad design on my part. It auto-populates on the PBOT, but I could have done better. So walking while black was, you can flip to the next one. Oh, this is a video.
That's a video. We can send it. I can send it out later if you want. We'll send it out later. Yeah.
Just keep going. So walking while black it is a kind of a larger conversation that the country is having, I would say. We're in just a really critical moment right now, but we got here because of decades of work, as I'm sure everybody knows. So, you know, in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of interest in this idea of safety in the public realm, especially for our BIPOC communities, our Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so people who normally wouldn't have really thought twice about this are now learning through things like our Walking While Black work that in fact, people of color have been experiencing harassment, violence, threats, personal harm in these public spaces. And what PBOT is sort of reckoning with, and I think a lot of agencies are reckoning with, is the fact that this is our right of way. You know, we manage this, we own this is ours. And so we have to consider the full implication of what that means. So Walking While Black, this is some national data to support this. 2 years ago when I started giving this presentation, this was not available. So I was very excited. I actually emailed Twee like, oh my God, there's like recent data, like CDC finally released some information. So that's exciting progress for me to see. They have been keeping this information, in fact, in-house. They released age-adjusted, I know, I'm like, this is a lack of enthusiasm. It's very exciting for my part of the world. Age-adjusted pedestrian death rates by race and ethnicity. And you can see they give 3 categories: white non-Hispanic, Black non-Hispanic, and Hispanic. And this is very limited. It's also really not language that we use anymore, but you can see the disproportionate impact as pedestrian fatalities have risen over the last 10 years. You can see the disproportionate impact on our Black population and on our Latinx population. They are growing at, in this graph, it really looks like Black is outpacing Latinx. Other graphs will show other data, but regardless, Black populations are disproportionately affected. Unfortunately, you cannot see the API data, and you also cannot see the Native American data, which shows additional impacts there. But the next slide should have a very nice graph for a little bit different time range, where you can see the percentage of pedestrian deaths and the percentage of the population. So the foundation for Walking Well Black, the kind of PBOT program, which is linked there and will be probably chatted out to you, is this disproportionate impact on our Black populations, and additionally, Portland found Latinx populations, was prompting a conversation with the community that probably needed to happen a long time ago, to be totally frank, in order to reconcile what this data said with what the community was experiencing and feeling. And so they came out with this beautiful report that showed that, in fact, a lot of Black folks are not just, it's not just the data, their individual experience is really backing up what we're seeing here nationally and locally. Black folks are much more likely to be killed as a pedestrian. They're more likely to be hospitalized for injuries. They're more likely to be hit in the first place. Like all of the measurements that we would use to define an unsafe environment for a pedestrian, Black folks are outpacing white people. So Irene Marion, who is our Equity and Inclusion Officer for PBOT, led this effort, and she did a really wonderful job. And I highly recommend taking the time to go through the report to read the experiences of Black Portlanders in this sphere. Thank you. Yeah, that was great timing, Michael. Thank you. So beautiful. So from an engineering perspective, so I kind of took all of this data and I was reading more about Walking Well Black and watching these videos, which went viral back in 2016, of these young Black men being harassed on the street by police for jaywalking, or hit by cars and then charged with jaywalking, or other sort of variety of things. And then finding out that these young Black men actually knew the law extremely well because they were forced to confront this type of unfair, unjust, biased treatment every day. So I'm looking at these things, I'm seeing all this data, and I started thinking about how, as engineers, even though we are expected to be data kind of driven, numbers only type of people, in reality, everything that we do is founded in some past principle. I have to be deliberate about the way I talk about this. And the reality of it is that the code that we wrote and the way in which we think about the work that we do is based on the person who wrote that. And that person didn't look like me, and they didn't look like my family, right? So thinking through some of these elements, we have to understand perceptions of behavior versus actual behavior. So the perception of behavior is that oftentimes people believe that brown folks just jaywalk more. We see them do it, they jaywalk more, or they're drunk more, or they're homeless more, and they're wandering the streets. And that's why they're more vulnerable to this type of activity, when in fact studies have shown that that is not the case. That all things held equal, you will see that whites and non-whites have no difference in behavior amongst underage driving, illegal actions, speeding, DUIs, all of those are consistent. But we are kind of implementing this perceived behavior. We're implementing codes and laws based on this perceived behavior. So the next one is, there we go. So some research came out of PSU talking about implicit bias, which I mentioned earlier in the talk, and understanding racism through this lens. The data showed that people of so drivers were less likely to yield for people of color, for Black people in particular, than for white people. So they measured a study. I'm sure we can just send you the study. Don't worry about any links. They ran a study that asked pedestrians to cross at the specific location, and had sort of like, I'm sorry, it's not coming to me. It's not important. You can read the study. The point of this was that they found that people are displaying implicit bias when they're driving. They're just not stopping for Black and brown pedestrians, which is something that we saw in our Walking While Black study and has been further backed up by multiple sets of research. So one of the things, could you actually go back up to the previous slide? Thank you. So one of the big things that came out of that study was finding that drivers were more likely to stop closer to Black pedestrians than to white pedestrians. Like, it took them longer, their perception reaction time was longer for Black pedestrians. And we don't really know the reason why, but with this piece of information as a traffic engineer, I'm able to better design the roadway to accommodate this, right? That's something that I can account for. Now you can go to the next one. So what we can conclude is that pedestrians in communities of color, we just need to provide better facilities. We need to provide facilities that actually accommodate these communities and not assume that this universalist design that we had originally created is applicable across the board. So we're at a critical moment, and we need to figure out how we're going to meet this moment as engineers and of course as planners and city employees. Next one. So that starts with researching the infrastructure. Like I was telling you about this, this history of racist planning document that the planning group came out with, our Bureau of Planning Service came out with. And one of the things that we're looking at is, you know, we put in a lot of infrastructure that seems really good and it functions pretty well, we think, but we haven't really studied it. We haven't really looked at it and gone, is this working for everybody? What communities are working? Is this working during the day? Is it working during the night? And so a big part of kind of moving forward, thinking about equity, thinking about race, is really investigating like our best practices and understanding, are they best for everyone or are they best for a certain group? And curb extensions are one I usually like lean to as an obvious get, because the whole thing about curb extension is it's supposed to like put you in line with the cars, right? So you kind of get up so the cars can like see you really well, and you're sort of almost in the path of travel. Now, if let's say I am a vulnerable pedestrian, I'm at high risk for being hit by cars. Maybe I know a lot of my friends and family have been hit or have near misses. Maybe street lighting isn't designed in such a way that illuminates my skin well. I might not want to put myself in the road. And further, it's likely that people who are experiencing implicit bias are not going to be stopped for anyways. So when we think about some of the existing infrastructure through that light, we can see that in fact, we might not have the right tools in place right now to provide what we need to be providing for our most vulnerable populations. And just like with ADA and just like with the sort of like the 85th percentile ideas, like we design for the people who are the most vulnerable. We design for the most extreme. And that way we protect everyone. That's a principle of traffic engineering in this country. And right now we're not doing that because we're not providing safety for our Black pedestrians. So the next slide is, you know, as we move forward through this work, we will design better. We have to design better. We have to think more deeply about the work that we're doing. And one of the primary things is, how do we light Black skin? We know it's failing. It's obvious. We have lots of data to show that Black pedestrians at night are being killed at high rates. We know that, that's a fact, but we haven't really come to any kind of concrete solutions on how to deal with it. I think you all, are gonna have our signals and street lighting director come and speak with you. And he might talk about, I think we have some pilot projects, I think that they're proposing, but we have to like really deeply research this idea and think about it and contemplate what's the best option for these communities. So this is another link, the Lighting Research Center. If that's a topic you're interested in, I highly recommend looking into it because it's a fascinating field of research. We have a lot of information about skin color, or about, sorry, clothing color, and virtually none about skin color. So 8:32, whew, just about made it. I'd love to take your questions if there was any in the chat. I know your class ends in like 5 minutes, so thank you for bearing with me while I rattled through a lot of information. Anybody? It's late. I know you can go to bed, or you can ask this random traffic engineer some questions. We
do have some time. And Marisa, thank you so much. That was awesome. Carrie.
I don't really have a question. It was more of a comment that it just hit me. The Oregon crosswalk law, that like part of it is you have to indicate that your intention to cross the road, you know, whatever that means. And what, you know, people aren't seeing people actually there at all to intend that they're going to cross the road. I mean, that's like, so it's baked in the law. Like every once in a while things just hit me over the head like crazy.
I mean, it's a great example. Our jaywalking laws are the same way. And the video, unfortunately, you can't see the video, but the video is a really good example of what it looks like when we start to enforce these type of things. And so, yes. So what does a gesture look like? Well, if you can't see somebody because their skin is dark and we didn't light that area, they could be jumping up and down and waving their arms, and you would still not be found at fault. So yeah, it is in the law.
Megan, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, mine was more so on like, I guess, the feeling of safety. Like even if, let's say, the area is more like barricaded from getting hit by traffic or whatever. Let's say you're a high school student walking home or whatever, better lighting is better overall for that sort of thing too as well, right?
Oh yes, yep. Yeah. Anything we do, so ADA is the kind of easiest thing to look at for this, because oftentimes people will say like, we can't just change the code for this one group of people. It's like, well, we already did that. We created the American with Disabilities Act. And in that act, we asked people to make curb ramps. We, asked people to create the PED signals that make noise. And all of those are institutionalized changes that have been made nationally. And it took a long time and it was a rough fight, but this is where we are now. So we know it's possible. And now those things are things that we expect and rely on in every place we go to be able to use. And similarly, as we continue down this path, we will find these are going to be tools that protect everybody. They're going to protect our children better. Absolutely. They're going to protect our elderly people better. 100%.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
No.
Okay.
Thanks, Marisa. That was awesome. My question is about Vision Zero and the results that you're seeing from that so far, and how you then overlay like the equity results on top of that.
Yeah, Vision Zero is a really good. We have some excellent people who work on that at PBOT. It's a tough one. I don't work on Vision Zero in particular, but we are definitely seeing, you know, lower speed saves lives. So even if our crashes aren't going down, we know that the lower speeds will result in lower fatalities. As we continue to implement these changes, we're seeing, I was going to say reduced vehicle use, but that's a little bit misleading because COVID, we had a lot of reduced vehicle use, which you'll see going forward in your next presentation. Vision Zero and the equity plan were made together into our PED-PDX plan, which is available online. And both of those were used to help. Sorry, my brain just like went out briefly. Both of those were used to help, plan and design for our vulnerable communities. Yes, and so I work in the traffic group. Vision Zero was a part of our division. My boss, Wendy Cowley, is a traffic engineer for the city of Portland, and she cares intimately about this project. We've seen fewer right hooks, fewer fatalities from left turns, which I guess used to be a really big problem. Pedestrians in crosswalks would be hit by cars turning left. So we've added these extensions. That was Wendy's big project, and that has, we've seen a significant reduction. I mean, the truth of the matter is we're still seeing PED fatalities. And so it's really hard to talk about it without getting caught up in that reality. And I live in Northeast Portland, and we see them personally, like physically see them out on the road. And a lot of that has to do with pushback that we get. We get pushback on the speed, we get pushback on the design. People don't believe in the projects, and then we see some non-compliance. And so, anyways, I wish I had a more uplifting. I was trying to figure out a way to spin it, but the truth is, it's a really tough conversation. But having a Vision Zero person come in would be really interesting, I think, to hear about that.
Yeah, thanks.
I know Vision Zero was a big initiative for Leah Treat when she was our director. Mm-hmm. And I know our current director, Chris Warner's, also that's big for him as well. We are right at 8:40. I know my colleague Matt on the other side in Toronto has a ton of questions for Marisa, but what I'll do is I'll email both of you together, if that's okay. Sure. Matt and Marisa. Next week we have Peter Kuntz, which is our lighting and illumination traffic division manager, and he and his group has been studying COVID and its impacts on traffic. So it'll be very interesting. So we can talk more about lighting next week as well with Peter. He is really, truly the lighting guy for the entire city. But not just that, but it's just this equity work will continue. It's really hard to spin it in a positive way, Marisa. I don't know how you could do it. I don't think it's hard any way you can. I mean, you're excited about getting this data, but you're excited about getting data about death.
I know. Really I cut out a lot of the fatality data from last year, right? I used to have slides on it. I've cut it back.
So next year when I have you back, I will not have you follow Earl. I will give you the whole 2 hours. But I think this was fantastic. This was great. We're able to hold the attention from so many people. And we're getting into 9 o'clock. So I think it's bedtime for everyone soon. So I want to thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging in the class today and working on your projects. So take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Marisa. See y'all.
Thank you.